For those of you who don't know, El Salvador has a new president. I'd say he's new. He's been on the scene for a couple of years, but he's been radically just turning around a country who's, as I put in the newsletter, their country was in the throes of where we seem to potentially be heading. You know, rampant crime, corruption, financial peril, and ultimately, in a very short time, he's been spearheading a massive change where El Salvador went from arguably the most violent, murderous country on earth.
Yep.
To a decrease of 70+%.
It's because one of the first things he did was just start locking them all up.
Yeah. And he's had tons of backlash from here in the West. You can't do that. You're violating human rights. Because he's going down. He's even locking up 12-year-olds.
Yep.
Like he's not playing any games. But the result of that has been a country that is now, residents are feeling safe. Economic positioning is starting to improve. And now you got a country like El Salvador being represented on the world stage, which is huge for their country.
He was also the first president to adopt Bitcoin
Yep.
as a reserve currency.
Yep.
And so he got rid of crime, he stabilized the currency, and basically brought economic certainty and wealth to El Salvador, which has historically struggled
100%
in those areas.
And so he came here to our shores over the last weekend. CPAC was happening, CPAC 24. And he had a fantastic 20-minute speech. We can include the link to it, but I want to share with you guys the first opening minutes. And then if the dialogue takes us there, there's a point at 18 minutes on where if you don't hear it today, you need to go listen to it, because there's something to be said about someone willing to come from a foreign nation and tell the nation that they're speaking to, you're wrong.
Yeah.
It takes guts to do that. And when someone's willing to do that, we should pay attention. So that's what we'll do this morning by checking out this little clip.
But if you want globalism to die here too, you must be willing to unapologetically fight against everything and everyone that stands for it. Fight for your freedoms. Fight for your rights. The next president of the United States must not only win an election, he must have the vision, the will, and the courage to do whatever it takes. And above all, he must be able to identify the underlying forces that will conspire against him. These dark forces are already taking over your country. You may not see it yet, but it's already happening. You don't see it as clearly because people are designed to see linear changes, not exponential ones. We don't always recognize how fast a problem can multiply and spiral out of control. The problem is much like the metaphor of the boiling frog. Once the water boils, it's already too late. People fail to see these things. It's our nature. Just like the frog, people become complacent and they don't realize how bad things are getting until it's too late. Well, I know, of course, El Salvador is a lot smaller country. Setting aside the differences, there's a similarity with what is happening here in the United States. We also had many apparently isolated problems in the 60s and the 70s. And we failed to realize as a country the severity of them until it became a civil war. By the time
we have all these problems we fail to address until ultimately it becomes too impossible, too big, too bad to ignore. Now he's saying that, it's for further context, it's a conservative gathering. So he's speaking to people who already lean that way in terms of sensitivity to what's happening in our nation. But even if you're not, you have to respect someone's words coming from overseas, living out the very things we just got done saying, his nation has been living out. And he sits here saying, there are bad things happening that you're choosing to ignore. And you can continue to ignore them, conservative, liberal, and not deal with them. But there's going to come a time where you can't ignore them. And I kicked this off with that because that's all about leadership.
It is. And if we're talking just about what's happening in the United States culturally, politically, there is a quote that comes from Adolf Hitler's book Mein Kampf, and it's called The Big Lie. And the reason that this happens is because most people could never lie so big. And the concept of the big lie is this. I'll read the quote. If you tell a lie big enough and keep repeating it, people will eventually come to believe it. The lie can be maintained only for such a time as the state can shield the people from the political, economic, and/or military consequences of the lie. It thus becomes vitally important for the state to use all of its power to repress dissent. For the truth is the mortal enemy of the lie, and thus, by extension, the truth is the greatest enemy of the state. I don't know about you, but for the last 4 years, anybody who spoke against the mainstream narrative controlled by the big media was essentially made to look like a conspiracy theorist or an outcast or a strategic takedown of their platform, whether that's big tech trying to censor them, whether that's the government or the FBI breaking their rights in an attempt to untangle them. You know, whatever you think about, oh man, who's the bald-headed dude that is always talking about men's, Andrew Tate. Andrew Tate got strategically taken down because he was making some noise and people were buying into it. I mean, they literally cut off every single aspect of him from the economy, in all ways of him making money, his bank accounts, I mean, his YouTube channels, his content channels, so on and so forth. And so I would encourage all of you to be eyes wide open. To say that'll never happen is a ridiculous statement, or that's impossible. When truthfully, over the last 4 years, you know, all those conspiracy theories are starting to come true.
Right.
And so as entrepreneurs, as the drivers of our economy and the United States, as the people who actually make up, 70% of the economy, we have a lot to say, and we need to be speaking up about it.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, there is a point that I mentioned about the 18-minute mark, and we won't get into it, but it's just really important that there's some real, I was talking to my wife about this, is that at some point, those of us who are building businesses and trying to be successful in personal development and doing this and doing that and on the grind and hustling and doing this and chopping wood and just going, there's at some point at which the things happening around you in this nation as they are happening, you're going to have to say, am I willing to put those things on hold to address a greater issue, which is the threat to me being able to even be able to continue to pursue that stuff?
Well, it used to be if you were an entrepreneur or a local businessman, you were kind of like the mayor of your local community. Right. You were actively involved. I mean, just look at everybody who wrote the Declaration of Independence, right? They were all entrepreneurs.
100%.
Go back to, biblical times, all the disciples, all entrepreneurs, right? So that changed at some point. Basically, people said, I don't want any part to do with that. I'm just going to go make my money and go hide away. Yeah. And that's the worst thing that you can actually do.
100%.
Use your platform to make impact in a positive way. And I think you're seeing more of that. So I don't think it'll feel so separate like it has in the past. I think got more guys like you and me who have an active platform are going to be speaking up, going to be involved in our communities, are going to be pushing initiatives like Convention of States. We're going to be speaking out politically and boldly, and maybe even run for, mayor or Senate or governor or whatever it might be. Yeah. Right. And so that's changing. Hey, look at a guy like Donald Trump. Right. Oh, he's not a politician. So you'd rather have a career politician, somebody who literally has never done anything, go in and run the country? Like, that makes absolutely no sense.
No sense at all. And the one thing I thought about last night, I was actually thinking about this specific thing, was that the reason why we need entrepreneurs to stake their claim and walk in conviction is because it actually gives permission to the people around them to do so.
Right.
There's a reason why you're an entrepreneur in the first place. You were willing to assume some risk. You were willing to walk in a manner that was uncommon per se, or less preferred. And because of that, that actually makes you a leader.
Right.
And so when you choose to double down, when you choose to stand on what's right, you actually give permission to those who might feel weaker or feel like they have so much more to lose, say, I'm going to do the same.
Yep.
And that's why the significance of those signers saying, we pledge our fortunes. Because in doing so, we are showing that this is what matters most.